the paradox is you can't understand yourself, and there's no need to understand yourself. What understanding self really means is understanding how you are not being your authentic self. In other words, it's noticing all the inauthentic selves that you create in your consciousness. In other words, every time you attach to anything or anyone, an idea or a belief, then you build an identity out of that, albeit just for a few seconds sometimes, right through to a whole lifetime. This is why everyone's pretending to be someone they're not, but they don't realize it. And so self-understanding is seeing how and when and with what I am doing that in the universe of my consciousness, and realizing that's what's causing me to suffer. That's what's blocking the light of my consciousness. That's what's in the way of me connecting with others effectively.
Let's talk communication. Today with Mike George. I'm Telana Simpson, and today's Conversation That Counts is with Mike George, who is based in England. Mike plays a variety of roles, including coach, author, spiritual teacher, management tutor, mentor, and facilitator. I asked Mike to share more about the field of emotional intelligence and relationships and the role that these play in our spiritual development. Mike, I heard you talk recently in Johannesburg at a lovely talk that you gave, and one of the things that you said that really resonated with me was you said the purpose of life is to live.
Yeah.
The question then is, how are you living?
Yes.
So I thought let's start by asking you then, Mike, how are you living?
Very good. Well, the answer I gave to the question that I posed myself was ultimately you only have a choice to live constructively or destructively. So when you live constructively, then you start tapping into your own natural creativity. So I live, in a sense, for creativity. What I do is based around creativity. So whether it's writing books or running seminars or courses or talking to people, it's all a creative process, basically. And I'm mindful to ensure the quality of my creativity is as great as possible. I won't go high because then we get highs and lows, but as deep as possible, I guess, is the right way to say it.
Great. So you're a very creative person. I mean, you've written a number of books. Maybe just if you share a bit about your background. How did you get to be where you are today?
35 years ago, woke up one day very stressed out. It kind of crept up on me very slowly over many years, and decided I had to do something about it. So it was the kind of my brick wall moment, basically, and then I gave up what I was doing, went to look outside, inside to see what I had to change, and that's when I began to learn how to meditate, start exploring the self, because I realized the one thing no one ever teaches us is self-understanding. And unless I understand me, then I can't manage me, I can't manage my creative process. I don't know how to think, how to feel, how to interact with others ultimately in the most effective ways. So the whole past 35 years has been a journey of self-understanding in a sense, and then finding ways to share it, because as you share it, you expand it, you deepen it within yourself.
Because it's very much like to express and share our form, and with self-awareness to get to know ourselves, I think was another concept that you spoke about on why are we here on earth. We're here to express and share. But the other point I wanted to maybe ask you, just to move on a bit then, was it's actually a quote from your book called The 7 Myths About Love, actually. And in that, you said, intuitively we know that it is only by opening our own heart and in giving of ourself without condition that love can start to flow into and through our life. And then another thing you said in the talk again is when we give of ourselves and we know our power and our strength, we grow. So I just want to ask you what you mean by giving of ourselves.
Well, I mean, in a sense, you know, when you give that gift once a year at Christmas time to a friend or a family member, then you are giving the gift, but really the energy that goes with it is the energy of you, which is good wishes or good feelings or what we call love, which is the highest vibration of consciousness. So when you give with love a gift, then it's really you giving with the energy of you. So you're extending yourself, you're reaching out, you're connecting with the other. And it's only in such moments that you actually know what you have within you. At any other moments, you're not really aware of what is within you. It's only when you give of yourself that you become aware of that. So a paradox is if you want to know what you have within you, which is really what you are, then give yourself away. Which is, I guess, what all the basic spiritual paths have said is called surrender. When you surrender, then it's not a static process, it's a dynamic process, because you're always in relationship to what you are surrendering, whether it's the moment, the scene in front of you, a person, a philosophy or whatever. When you surrender, then you're giving yourself away.
Sure. So when you surrender, so you say it's in relationship to something else. You've got me thinking here. So surrender as in just being with that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if there's a scene in front of you, then you're either letting go and letting yourself be fully present and connected to that scene, which is a form of surrender, or else you're in some kind of resistance to it. And the scene actually isn't external, it's internal, it's in your own consciousness, it's how you're creating it. So in a sense, you can only ever really surrender to your own creation. And so come back a step from that, and the ultimate surrender is just being yourself. And most of the time, most people are not being themselves, they're trying to be someone else or something else. Because when you bring the world from outside in, you bring people, objects, you bring situations, and you lose yourself in those people, objects, and situations, not outside, but within your own consciousness. And that's when the ego is born, that's when resistance is born, that's when you get attached to the person, the situation, the event, or what you want to happen next. Yeah, so that's otherwise known as desire. So when you want something, you've already got it in your mind. So if I've got someone in front of me, I'm either attached to them right now, which is what usually happens, which means I'm identifying with them, not out there, but in my consciousness, in my own mind. And then I start running a story about what I want them to do. So I'm kind of imagining them doing what I want. And so when they don't do what I want, I go into resistance to them. And so that resistance then is basically the opposite of surrender. It's the unsurrendered self. It's the self in bondage. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much. So then to just be me then would be surrendering, instead of taking the outside information about other people and that inside, it would be bringing me from the inside out, expressing me in the moment, but also being with whatever the other person or the situation is.
Yeah, it's being with the other person, with the situation, without wanting anything, without creating any story about it, without bringing anything from the past or wanting anything in the future. It's sometimes in the mindfulness schools it's called present moment awareness. And so you're not losing yourself in anything or anyone. You're totally free, a liberated being in that moment. That's when you have the cleanest conversations in your world.
And I think it's also one of the hardest things to do.
Yeah, it is. It's not easy. Being yourself is the hardest thing in the world. It sounds easy. Oh, just be yourself. You'll be okay. But actually, it's really, really difficult because all our habits, all our conditioning and programming is to be someone who we're not.
So then how do we start undoing whatever that conditioning is then to be ourselves more? Because I mean,
Yeah.
it's a lot. If you think about just intimate relationships, often the challenges that couples have is because the one person or both people are probably bringing their past relationships into the current one. They're not seeing the person in front of them for who they are. They imagining that this person is like the last 10 boyfriends that have done whatever they've done.
Yeah.
So what would be, a step forward in starting to undo some of that conditioning?
First of all, you have to be interested. And the second is you have to realize that it's not the other person that needs to change, it's me. And usually you'll only be interested and you'll start to make those inquiries when something's not working in the relationship, when some harmony is lost, so there's some suffering or some pain, some button pressing between two people. And so usually that's when the other person is not doing what I want. They don't do what I expect. And so that suffering, that resistance that arises from that is tolerable for most people for most of their lives. They'll tolerate it. That's why you go into restaurants and you can frequently see couples sitting there, and they're out for the night and the evening, but they've got nothing to say to each other. I'm not saying that's the case with everyone, but they're kind of sitting there suffering in silence. They've been together for 28 years, and they've each got a story about the other, and that story is static. So they're not realizing how to invite the other to open up, to expand, to understand themselves. They're not having conversations about why I get grumpy or why I'm not very talkative or so on. And so they kind of tolerate. It's an unhappiness that's tolerable for a long, long time. But then, of course, I'm sure you know from your experience that you meet many people who are just either fed up tolerating it, or it's become so intense inside they have to look at it. And perhaps those are the kind of people that eventually come and see you and say, hey, I need help. I don't understand what's going on. Tell me, help me. And that's when the real inquiry into the self begins, and self-understanding begins for real. But even then, some people will go so far and say, well, that's enough now, thank you. I'm okay now. They're not really, but they'll say, I'm okay now. Yeah, and then off they go back into their cycle,
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say, because the pressure of that pain right now has been alleviated slightly.
Exactly, yeah.
But yeah, they don't go into the full inquiry, because a lot of the of our journey then in for us to be ourselves, and that's we're here on this earth to share ourselves, and that starts with understanding ourselves.
It does now, yeah.
And that's, I think, relationships are so wonderful because they do, as you say, they push your buttons, which gets you to look. So, yeah, key part of then, I believe also, is that we need to be looking within ourselves first before outside. Which I think.
Well, yes, and if we take the language literally, the paradox is you can't understand yourself, and there's no need to understand yourself. What understanding self really means is understanding how you are not being your authentic self. In other words, it's noticing all the inauthentic selves that you create in your consciousness. In other words, every time you attach to anything or anyone, an idea or a belief, then you build an identity out of that, albeit just for a few seconds sometimes, right through to a whole lifetime. This is why everyone's pretending to be someone they're not, but they don't realize it. Yeah, this is where pretentiousness comes from. And so self-understanding is seeing how and when and with what I am doing that in the universe of my consciousness. and realizing that's what's causing me to suffer. That's what's blocking the light of my consciousness. That's what's in the way of me connecting with others effectively. And so what you're ultimately doing is throwing off all the things that you're using to build a false sense of self. Yeah, there's ideas, people, images, beliefs, stories. You're throwing it all off. You're, in essence, becoming naked. It's like taking off all your clothes in public at a physical level. So you're taking off all the veils that you've surrounded your consciousness with after a lifetime of learning and adopting the habits for culture, of teaching, of whatever. So ultimately you become naked. And when you're naked, you are being yourself, and there's nothing to know. There's nothing to understand anymore. You just are being yourself, if you know what I mean. Do you know what I mean?
No, because I thought I've never really experienced that.
Yeah.
But I've never stripped down in public.
Well,
But
the first one is, yeah, when you go in the mirror in the morning and you look in the mirror and you see your face, it's very difficult not to believe that that's what you are. What you see is what you are. But it's not. It's just a face.
So what are we then if we're not just that face?
Consciousness, the being of consciousness that animates, the anima, animation, the life force, if you want to call it that, psyche, soul, spirit, self, the I that says I am is the neatest way to say it. Anything after I am is not me. Anything, I am the body in the mirror? No. I am Mike George? No. I am Scottish? No. I am male? No, I'm not. I'm a writer? No. These are all ideas that I've created in my consciousness about me that I use to build an identity out of. But it's not really me. It's not truly me. They're just ideas. Nationality is just an idea.
Mm.
So the physical form, you know the separation, the body and soul, matter and mind, form and consciousness. So two energies. The physical body is the tangible, visible, always changing physical form, whereas consciousness is intangible, invisible, internal, can't see it. Science has nothing to say about consciousness because it's non-material. But you can be your own scientist. This is why meditators meditate, because they go beyond the material in their meditation. And we do it sometimes when we're talking to friends and we tune out. And our friend notices we've tuned out. We've gone somewhere and we've lost awareness of time, we've lost awareness of space, maybe just for a few seconds. But it's a moment when you know that you are of another dimension. Your body stays in time and space, but you can transcend it. And so when we learn to meditate, then we're actually learning to transcend the three dimensions of time and space. And that's why it's refreshing, that's why it's refocusing. That's why meditators meditate, ultimately.
And it also then gives us a experience consciously of I am.
Yes, exactly.
Right.
Free. You will taste, you'll touch that consciousness of I am, free of any other false identity, any other false sense of self. And you start to notice all the very many false selves that you create every day, hundreds of times every day, and you don't notice it. And suddenly you start joining the dots, and you notice that every time you become emotional about anything, it means you are creating a false sense of self, and something is threatening that as it must. Something's touching that as it must, and that's why you're taking it personally and reacting emotionally. The hardest thing, of course, is in a couple, because the couple, each one identifies with the other. They're using the other to build a sense of self, and therefore avoiding themselves. Yeah, that's why falling in love actually is a fall. You fall into the other in your own mind. But if you think about love, love is the most uplifting energy. It doesn't make us fall, it lifts us up. And so we've got this idea that falling in love is possible. but it's not. Love doesn't make you fall. It elevates, it frees you, it liberates you. You don't fall into anything. In truth, for me, when there is real love, true love. Now you're looking at me
Sure.
very strangely. What is
No,
this guy?
No, I don't know. I don't know where to go now with this. There's so many questions coming to mind because
Yeah.
because okay, so we want to know more about ourselves. That's why I understand we're born into this world to start to experience our amness consciously through experiences with matter. So in relationships, they show us how we veiled ourselves so that we can take away some of those veils to get to a conscious experience of us.
Well, now it's getting a little bit deeper. Let's try the principle of everything starts new and becomes old, and that includes consciousness. Everything, as you look in the material world around you, you can see it starts new and becomes old. It decays. Physical energy decays. And because consciousness is so wrapped in and the animator of physical energy called the body, it's affected by that decay, that process. And so consciousness also started new. So the body, physical matter starts new and consciousness starts new. So when everything's new, it's pure and fresh and innocent. There's no desire, there's just natural playfulness. Think of children, they're innocent and they're playful. They don't self-introspect, they don't suffer, they're not unhappy most of the time. And so imagine us like that when we began. Now we have to get into the territory a little bit of, this is not the first birth. But, if you go into most of the mythologies, you find dream time, Atlantis, Eden, Golden Age. These are all referring to a time when consciousness was new, that matter was new. So there was no intention, no conscious purpose to life. It was just innocent, pure, beautiful, conscious beings expressing themselves with each other in relationship in a pure new world. But then comes the gradual process of entropy, of the fall, of decay, of order to chaos. And now we wake up in our lives, and it's not that we want to express ourselves. Really, we want to know how to stop suffering. Yeah, and most people, they don't realize why they're suffering, so they take drugs to alleviate the suffering. And the drugs are television, their chocolate, their holidays, their clothes, their shopping, their fashion. These are all drugs that alleviate little bits of unhappiness. Until it becomes so great that none of these will have an effect anymore. Or there's some crisis in our life, or there really is a brick wall that hits us and we just fall apart. And that's usually when people say, wait a minute, drugs not enough, I need to do something a bit deeper, a bit more radical. That's why so few people really sustain the process of waking, because so few people have fallen that far into that kind of suffering. Most people are kind of tolerating the suffering with intermediate injections of their drugs to alleviate the suffering, if you know what I mean. So the ones who can't tolerate it now, who really got to do something about it, are usually the oldest souls. They've fallen the furthest, the longest. And so that's a sign of an old soul, really. They look at the world today and they go, what is going on? It's so superficial, it's so ephemeral, it's so transient. There's no depth, there's no value. People are killing each other, they don't care for each other. And so they're totally perplexed by this world. Whereas a new soul comes into this world and goes, wow, where's my iPod, my iPad, my knee pad, my head pad? Where are my toys? I want to have fun. This is a fun world. And so they're right into the material straight away. Whereas the old soul, they're going, wait a minute, there's no values here. There's the spirituality, the spirit is deadened here. And so they kind of notice that. So they suffer most. And so they're the ones who are more likely to sit back in a corner and say, wait a minute, what do I need to do to change? So it's there's a little bit of a story involved, and this is why not everyone suffers the same, becomes introspective the same. This is why 80% of people who come to meditation programs or talks about spirituality, They go away saying, oh, nice program, when's the next one, or what's on television later. It doesn't really impact them over long term.
So then if we wanted to go a bit deeper, then do a bit of the work you're saying, I suppose the question in the back of my mind is we spoke about our conditioning. We're trying to take off the layers, so take off all the clothes, doing that we're working to get to our essence. In order to engage with the world, though, don't we need some level of, of beliefs and ideas in order to engage with the world around us? So is it about not being attached to those ideas and being conscious of that they're just an idea instead of identifying with it, just saying, okay, this is just a, like you write, so that's a way that you express yourself in order to get money to put food on your table to feed this body so that you can sustain this life?
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Every day you're challenged. Situations and scenes come in front of you and people come in front of you, and they're challenging you to see how free you are inside. So it's not that I walk through passport control and I say to the guy, it says British, but I'm not really British. I don't say that. I speak the language of labels. I play the game, because the vast majority of people around me are asleep to who they really are, and they are conditioned to identify with their car, their job, their house, their nation, all of that. They're kind of lost in that kind of sleepiness. So I understand that. So I talk that language. But sometimes I fall asleep too, and because it's such a deep, deep conditioning over time. And so I notice when I fall asleep, whenever I become sensitive, feel slightly unhappy, get stressed, reactive, feel offended by anything, I notice these are all symptoms of my own sleepiness. So signals that I have to wake up again. So the whole process is falling asleep, waking up, falling asleep, waking up. Sometimes called victory and defeat in your own consciousness. So yes, it is about playing the game, speaking the language, and not identifying with whatever you're doing or whatever you're creating.
And then you touched there on emotions, because that's, I want to just step into a bit of that territory, the emotional intelligence, because it's the way I understand emotions and share with my clients, and it's very useful for me, is that, as I think you were saying, emotions are signals that tell you something.
Yeah.
So, because I find so many people come to me and they say they don't want to experience emotions. It's like, help me not to show my emotions and not experience them. And I'm so like, okay, we can do that, but through the journey they learn that emotions are actually useful. So how do you define emotions?
That's the place to start in conversations about emotions, is our definition, our understanding of them, because there's so much, so many people, so much material out there which for me are confusing and unclear for people, misleading if you like. And it's all to do with the meaning of the word, and separating feelings from emotions, and realizing how we use certain words but we mean something else. And of course the entertainment industries, they exploit our emotions. The marketing industry exploits our addiction to our emotions, and we don't realize that. We just think it's a normal part of the everyday life and the journey. So for me, emotion is any emotion is always a sign that I'm asleep, which means I'm attached to something or someone in my consciousness. I'm building a sense of identity out of something that I'm not. That's what emotion is a sign of. Now, before saying anything more, it's necessary to say that for me, love is not an emotion. Happiness, true happiness, is not an emotion. Pleasure is an emotion. Excitement, which is confused with happiness, that's an emotion, but it's not real happiness. Joy, real joy for a human being is not an emotional state. Joy is a quiet state. Love is a quiet state. In fact, love is not warm. Love is cool. You know,
Okay.
it's not hot. It's cool. And so it's, you know, you can only kind of go so far with the intellectual representation of the meaning of emotions and feelings, but people have to see for themselves in their own experience how they are confusing themselves. I mean, the simplest illustration of that is the lessons we learn as children. That's where the emotional confusion starts. When mum says, you're 10 minutes late, why didn't you call? You know I always worry. Teenager says, but mum, stop worrying. Why are you worrying? And mum says, I worry because I care, which is the same as saying, I worry, which is fear, because I care, which is love. And so we're confusing fear with love, and they're the opposite end of the spectrum. Fear cannot be love. And if mum's really honest, then who's she really worried about? It's not the child, it's herself. It's how she will feel if something happens, ultimately. So fear is confused with love. When we, as children, go and see something stimulating, our parent says, isn't this exciting? Aren't you happy and excited? Happy and excited? And then the child says, yes, this is exciting and I'm happy. And in that moment, the child learns to believe that excitement is happiness. And for the rest of our lives, we go searching excitement, believing that is the only happiness. And so we confuse happiness with excitement. And it makes us look outside for stimulation. And so this is why almost the total population of the world is addicted to something. Because if you search for your happiness outside, you're going to become dependent. So it's these confusions that happen at a very early age that are handed on by our parents. They didn't know any better. They got it handed on to them. And now it's all magnified by the media. And of course, Hollywood and Bollywood, this is why they're so rich. Because we're addicted to excitement and we're addicted to fear. And so they then say, well, that's fine. We can give you all the material, all the stimulation you like, and you can indulge in those addictions as much as you like. And we do. And we pay them. We actually go to a movie, a horror movie, and we pay someone to frighten the living daylights out of it in the name of relaxation. I mean, that's really kind of crazy. Stand back and look at it. And you can only laugh. So the whole territory of emotional intelligence is riddled with all of this in different ways. And that's just the way it's happened. It's okay. But that's why for many people, emotions and feelings are probably the most unclear things in their inner universe.
So then just to differentiate again, to make it clear, that what's the difference between emotion and feeling?
Emotion is an agitation of your mind, a disturbance in your consciousness, which is caused by you, the self, becoming attached to something or someone. And then when something happens to that something or someone, it feels like it's happening to you, and you agitate yourself. You create an agitation in your consciousness, and a disturbance, basically. Whereas feeling is like a perception. Feeling is when you perceive something by touching it. And we can feel on three levels: physical, mental, and spiritual. You touch a piece of cloth and you feel, you perceive the quality. You receive an idea and you perceive it. You create it in your mind and then you perceive it. You touch it, you feel it. And sometimes your little head goes, oh yeah, I get that. That feels logical. And that's the rational way of feeling. Sometimes you don't get the logic of something, but you recognize it and you go, oh yeah, that feels right. And that's the intuitive way of feeling at a kind of mental, intellectual level. And then spiritual feeling is just picking up the vibes of another person. As you pick up, you become sensitive to the radiant vibrations of another human being, which we can all do, usually with someone close to us. Without even seeing them, we pick up their vibes. And so that's a spiritual feeling. Subtle, very subtle feeling. So we can all feel at these levels, but most human beings get stuck at the physical, sensual level. And so that's why most people immediately associate feelings with something physical. But it's much, much deeper than that. Much deeper. And again, if you meditate, you'll begin to notice that you start having very subtle feelings.
And they're very subtle, which is different to the feelings attached to the external material world, and also very different to
Yeah.
emotions, because
Yes,
emotion has a very different energy in
it
our
does.
mind-body
You'll
emotions.
feel your emotions. You know, there's a moment when you're angry and you say to someone, I feel very angry. So what, in that moment, you're actually acknowledging that there's a disturbance in your consciousness called anger that you've created and that you are now perceiving, touching, feeling. And if you keep saying, I feel angry, then it's like you're gradually coming away. You're saying, there's me and there's the anger, and I can feel it, I can touch it, I can see it here. And if you keep coming away from the anger, it dies, it subsides. All emotion dies under observation, basically. Because when you observe, you detach from that disturbance and it loses its power. So, it's the ultimate therapy.
Yes, and yet it seems so counterintuitive. As I said, a lot of
Yes,
people come to
it
me
does.
just wanting to run away from their emotions, and
Yes,
you know, well,
that's right.
the way to deal with them is to actually experience them, as you
Yeah,
said, to look at them, because when
yeah.
you get the message, they subside. So then I just also want to move on, just because for me emotions are so related to relationships, and as we've been saying, like, we learn so much between whatever we are in relationship with, whether it's relationship with idea or people. And I know in your talk you spoke a bit about people pleasing, or I think there was a question, or, you know, and I think that happens so often. So as you say, we get lost in identifying with other people, but also trying to please them, into whether it's to keep the peace or seeking approval. I don't know if you want to say, because also I was thinking a bit about, you know, we started off this conversation about giving of ourselves. Do you know what I mean? So I learn about me by giving of myself to another, and yet the downside can be the people-pleasing side. I don't know. Like, so how do you differentiate that, and what's going on with
When I say
that whole
giving yourself,
pattern?
I don't mean giving your physical body. There's two energies at play, you
Yes,
see.
yes, yeah.
Most people don't get that. They say giving myself to another means surrendering my body to the other. And they say, oh yeah, I can do that, because there's a nice physical sensation that comes back in return. And then they mistake that physical sensation to be the only happiness in life. But actually what it leads to is an addiction. I just want more of it. I want more physical sensation, more stimulation. And most relationships are based around just that physical level. And that's why, you know, most relationships will have very turbulent times, essentially. You're not giving me what I want. You're not doing what I want. You're not saying what I want. You're not looking at me the way I want you to look at me. You know, so it's all based on the physical. And so it kind of begins when we're very young, I think, when we're kids, and mum and dad say, if you do what I want, then I'll be very happy with you. And you get this warm wave of energy from me called approval. But we mistake that approval for love. But it's not love, because it's not coming without condition. And you know that when you don't do what mum and dad wants, and they become unhappy. And so you realize, not intellectually, but as a child, you realize that it's all conditional. And so you're mistaking approval for love. It's conditional, and then you grow up with those lessons, those moments. And then the authority figure that replaces the parent is either the manager, or maybe your partner, or some strong character in your group of friends. And then you're always looking for that wave of warm energy of approval for them, because you've just learned to believe that love has to come from someone else. It has to come from outside in. It has to be acquired. And there's a whole huge mistake in the psychological industry around this as well, and that the myth has grown up that we need to be loved. And so along with that mythology that we need to be loved has come that the parent needs to be the only source of love. And these are huge mistakes, because for me, we don't need to be loved, but we need to see how to be love. which is really the same as we need to see how to be ourselves. Yeah, so I need to see how to be love. And if I'm in the presence of a parent who's demonstrating true love, I will receive it anyway, but it won't come with condition. It won't come with the energy of be dependent on me for love, which is what most parents are transmitting, basically. And so it comes with this, imagine, if you like, the perfect human being who is unconditionally loving and who's just giving anyway, even if you do anything, doesn't matter what you do, make a mistake, don't do a job very well, they're still unconditionally supporting you all the way. And they don't get upset in any way with what you say or do. They don't use their emotion in any way to blackmail you. Imagine a parent like that. I mean, that's probably talking about a saint, actually. But that would be me watching someone being love. And I would learn by watching, because that's how children learn, by watching and feeling, by watching and feeling. And so I would grow up in the aura of that being, and I would naturally realize from that in my own learning that actually the only source of love in life is my own heart, which is me. You know, and in fact, I wouldn't be growing up with the illusion that I have to be dependent on someone, I have to be needy of someone to know what is already naturally within me. It would just emerge from me naturally. But we all grow up, I'm being very generalistic by saying we all, but the vast majority in my experience grow up with this illusion that we have to acquire, we require it, we have to seek it, we have to find a person to give it to us. Oh, it's just huge, the industries that have grown up around that in the world, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah, and
I don't know if that makes sense, but
it doesn't, when we fall in, as you say, into that trap, because it's so conditioned everywhere we look and in our own upbringing. So if we're here to just be love, you know, and to understand that it's about, I can't remember how you said it. You said it so beautifully, just to learn that to be love. How do we go then in terms of relationships? I mean, there's a lot of concepts, and maybe it's the misunderstanding again of it about setting boundaries. You know, when someone is trying to be abusive or, you know, crossing a line in some point where it actually could bring physical harm to us or to someone else. How does that play then in terms of, you know, in relationships where, because my sense, I don't, you know, it's not about me just sitting here going, you know, and letting life happen around me. I've also, you know, there's a sense of needing to protect myself, my body.
Yeah.
So how does that fit in?
Well, you know, if someone's being violent physically towards you, leave the room. Leave the relationship if it's a pattern. But of course, that's easier said than done. Yeah. And most people where there is physical abuse, they don't. They stay. Because perversely, paradoxically, I guess as well, is that they've attracted that person to be violent towards them. And that's probably because as children they had parents who were a little bit physically violent or someone in their life. And then they grew up believing that physical violence is a form of love. It's the only way they get attention, is that when they, you know, press another's button and cause them to be violent towards them. Oh, I'm getting attention. Oh, I'm alive, I exist. Oh, they must like me. They must love me. Oh, I mean, there are shelters all over the world now for people who are battered by their partners, both men and women. Yeah. But you ask most of them, and it takes them years to leave the relationship because of the codependency factor, you know. So this is the physical level. At the mental and spiritual level, then, you know, ultimately no one can hurt you because no one else is responsible for your thoughts and your feelings. Even when someone's battering your body, this is the difficult bit, if someone's battering your body, it's still possible to not suffer. And this is why, you know, pain is, as they say, compulsory, but suffering is optional. You don't see it very often, but there are people who are in a great deal of physical pain, but they don't suffer. In other words, they stay well in their being. Whereas most of us have great physical health, but boy, are we suffering. We are not well in our being because we get grumpy, we get upset, we get closed, we get resistant, we start hating other people, we start getting angry at things. And this is all self-created suffering because no one makes me think and feel in that way. That's my job as a conscious being. But to really see this and get this, I have to really get that there's two energies at play, the physical and the spiritual. I am the spiritual, and the physical is just my vehicle. It's my BMW, it's my Rolls Royce, but it's not me. I'm driving it. So real freedom begins with that realization that actually I'm 100% responsible for all my thoughts and feelings all the time. No one makes me suffer. People can cause physical pain, put a knife in my body, they can kick my leg, they can hit my head, and so they are responsible for the pain that they are inducing in my body, that I feel in my brain, but I'm responsible for any suffering that follows. That's really challenging for the vast majority of us, isn't it? I mean, the theory is easy, but putting that into practice, boy, that's not. But if I have to start with theory, sorry, go on.
No, it is, because then I think it's so difficult because it's taking that responsibility for ourselves. And actually then, as I think we start off saying, having to do the work.
Yeah.
Because it takes a lot of work then to be conscious of your thoughts and not just let old patterns and conditioning
kick in. Yeah, that's it.
So maybe before we wrap up then, Mike, how can people get hold of you if they want to know more about you and your work?
I guess the main route is through the website relax7.com, which is under construction or reconstruction at the moment, but there is a page there which kind of has everything on it. And my email is mike@relax7.com. So always happy to help if anyone wants to connect.
That's the word relax and then the number 7.com.
Number 7, .com. mike@relax7.com.
Oh. So maybe if we can just then end off, Mike, do you have a parting thought or something, because we've been saying how hard this journey is and how it takes a lot of work, and our emotions are the signals that help us know when we're falling asleep to try and wake us up again. So any parting thoughts?
Only is to give yourself a chance to see for yourself, and to not just believe what you read, what you hear, what other people are saying, no matter how impressive they sound or how impressive they may be. But the challenge now is, in the process of waking up to who I am, is seeing for yourself. And that requires introspection, it requires reflection, contemplation, the practice of some kind of meditation, so that you increase your self-awareness. And so build into your day a few minutes here, a few minutes there, if you can, to stop and just be aware. And then if you can adopt some kind of meditative practice, even better. And then finally hang out with people who are talking about these things, so that your conversation is exploratory, it's revealing in its own way. Don't go and hang out with the toxic individuals. We're all a bit toxic, essentially, but hang out with people who are really into talking and exploring and discovering at this kind of level, because we color each other, we serve each other, we help each other in that process. So I can talk all day.
And likewise, so it's been great hanging out with you.
Thank you, and the same to you. And I had a look through your website actually, and I can see you're doing amazing stuff. So many different things: coaching, talking, helping, guiding. It's fantastic. It's great.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's how you're finding yourself in that process as well.
I think that's what leads me to do so much, is this inner quest to learn. Well, thank you so much, Mike.
Pleasure, anytime. Thanks, Telana.
I'm Telana Simpson, and this has been Let's Talk Communication. For more details about the show and about Mike George, my guest today, you can please find my website, which is talkcommunication.innercoaching.co.za, or you can follow me on iTunes and YouTube. Thanks for listening.